What I want to say about congestive heart failure, CHF, congestive heart failure, the idea behind this is that the cardiac output, the amount of blood pumped by the heart each minute, the cardiac output is so low that blood circulation is inadequate to meet the tissue needs. So, to describe this phenomenon, I wanted to point out basically what we're looking at here is the systemic circulatory system. We start with the left side of the heart. The left ventricle in particular pumps blood into the systemic circulatory system. Here's your typical cardiac output, which is about 5 liters per minute or 5,000 milliliters per minute. And as blood is output, it's basically distributed amongst a number of different tissues in the body, and that is the primary function of the heart. The whole purpose of the heart being there is to ensure that the tissues of your body are adequately oxygenated and get the proper amount of nutrients and the proper hormones and so on. That's the function of the heart. So when we worry about congestive heart failure, it's not so much that we're so worried about the heart as it is that we're worried about the other tissues suffering from lack of heart function. So when the heart stops functioning well, it stops distributing blood well, and the tissues of the body suffer as a result. You know, the pulmonary circuit is shown up above here, which is where the blood becomes oxygenated, but it's much more important to describe what's happening to these tissues because the pulmonary circuit does not require quite as much blood pressure and so on to make it happen. Okay, so there's 4 different ways that congestive heart failure works, and then we're going to explore a 5th as well and go into a little bit more detail. So the first of these is called coronary atherosclerosis. Coronary atherosclerosis is the clogging of the coronary vessels with fatty buildup. So what we're looking at here is, here we already have a stent in place, but you get the idea here where you have these fairly small coronary vessels. The purpose of coronary arteries is to feed the heart itself, to feed the walls of the heart from the outside. So directly from the aorta, you have these little tubes, these little vessels that go down directly from the aorta and go outside of the heart and then go dive into the walls of the heart and feed very, very important muscles that allow the heart to keep functioning. So those vessels tend to be fairly small, and if you have plaque buildup, say fatty buildup, like triglycerides or LDLs, like high levels of fats in your blood, this could be an indication that you need to start watching those coronary vessels for buildup. So here we have a coronary vessel which is starting to become blocked. And what we do is we place stents in place, and here we have a drug-coated stent, a heparin-coated stent, that allows for that vessel to be open again, and you can see that the blood is able to pass freely through there, which is a great way to treat this. Another way we might treat this might be with bypass, a bypass surgery. You've heard about quadruple bypasses, for example, 4 different tubes put in place that completely bypass. They go around the block. So here we have the original vessels which are obstructed, and now we've placed vessels. They're oftentimes veins taken directly from the leg, and we've just simply taken and bypassed the blockage. So that's what that is. These are all due to coronary atherosclerosis. Just so you know, there's other reasons why congestive heart failure might occur. So this is a very common way. Coronary atherosclerosis is one of the biggies. But there are other reasons why these things might occur. Persistent high blood pressure might be one. So when we look at this here, where we have the pushback of blood pressure against the ventricles, the persistent high blood pressure can actually affect the health of the myocardium. Over time, if you have high blood pressure for a long period of time, like years or decades, the myocardium suffers because, as we suggested, you need to exert even more force to push blood out against high blood pressure situations, and that can actually damage the walls of the heart. And additionally, you can have what's called multiple myocardial infarcts, multiple MI. This is one common way that we describe a heart attack. Multiple MI is basically a heart attack where there's so much damage to the heart that it no longer is functioning well at all. And by the way, multiple myocardial infarcts are ischemic events, And ischemia is the idea that a region of the heart is deprived of blood. And it's possible that a region of the heart could be deprived of blood because of coronary atherosclerosis in the first place. So coronary atherosclerosis could be the thing that leads to your multiple myocardial infarcts or your ischemic events. So these could eventually lead to this type of a heart attack. So an infarct is a general term that means tissue damage. We normally hear about myocardial infarcts, but there are also infarcts that can happen in different parts of your body, the brain being a good example of a place where you could experience infarcts. Okay, so ischemic events, let me just do a little aside here, kind of underneath of, kind of a subheading underneath of multiple myocardial infarcts should probably be ischemia, because this is probably the best place where we have a pairing here. So ischemia is where a region of the heart is deprived of blood. And there could be a number of things that happen as a result, but basically the heart might start to undergo glycolysis, which is only the first stage of aerobic respiration. The cells of the heart, those contractile muscle fibers of the heart must have oxygen at all times. They're very thirsty for oxygen. You will recall all of those mitochondria that we see. Let me see if I can find that picture real quick. All those mitochondria that we see in there indicate that you constantly need a supply of oxygen. And if at any time you are deprived of oxygen or you're deprived of nutrients, you'll no longer be able to respire appropriately, and these cells will no longer be able to do their job well. So when they're not doing their job well, it's a major problem. It could cause rising acidity from the lactic acid produced from glycolysis. And generally speaking, the gap junctions are simply going to close off and isolate the damaged cells. So one of the reasons, just so you know, one of the reasons why we have gap junctions and we have all these intercalated discs is so that we have the ability to close off damaged cells and kind of isolate damage to one locus inside of the heart. And once those gap junctions are closed, basically the cell is isolated, and it's hopefully not going to affect changes in any other cells that are neighboring cells. Anyway, so when the gap junctions close and isolate the damaged cells, those cells are no longer participating in the contraction of the heart. And if you have enough of those damaged sites, it can lead to total dysfunction of the heart, which is why multiple myocardial infarcts is such a problem. The more of them you have, the less functional your heart is. So over time, this can actually impair the pumping of the heart. So that's all under the heading of multiple myocardial infarcts. And ischemia is basically what results from MI. Okay, another way that a congestive heart failure can work, so the fourth way that we're going to mention here is what we're going to call dilated cardiomyopathy. Over time, when your ventricles are fairly large, your ventricles can actually stretch and become permanently stretched and actually become flabby, and that interferes with your contractility. So generally speaking, top athletes are going to have very large ventricles, which is very beneficial. If you think about it, it's very beneficial to your cardiac output and your stroke volume. However, over time, if you continue to have large ventricles, this can lead, unfortunately, to dilated cardiomyopathy. So that's one way that you can get dilated cardiomyopathy, and there are others, though there's other reasons why this might occur. So those are the four ways that we have congestive heart failure: coronary atherosclerosis, persistent high blood pressure, multiple myocardial infarcts, and dilated cardiomyopathy. Basically damage to the heart where it's just not pumping as well as it should. Just so you know, there's kind of a fifth one here that's not exactly, it's kind of an unrelated topic, but sort of not, because this is the other way that you can experience a heart attack. It's called a cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest is the other side of a heart attack. So we have multiple myocardial infarcts, which is one way that the heart begins to shut down. Oftentimes this will happen slowly over time. If you have cardiac arrest, which is our number 5 here, sort of, like number 5 with the parentheses, cardiac arrest is where you have a malfunction of the electrical system itself. So it's not specifically damage to the cells, but rather where the electrical system of the heart begins to shut down.